Hey guys, I'm Vidal1258 here. I want to do a video today talking about silver, and specifically how to measure the wealth that's stored in my stack of silver and in your stack of silver. And so I think there are 4 ways that I want to review today, and one of them I think is a terrible idea, a terrible metric by which to measure that wealth, and 3 are good examples of how you can measure your wealth. Let's get into it. The first is that we'll start with the negative, that we should avoid measuring our wealth of our silver stack in terms of how much fiat it will provide us. Because if you're buying silver, you must understand that it's a hedge against fiat failure. It's a hedge against hyperinflation and economic collapse. And so measuring your silver in fiat terms is actually akin to measuring a straight line with a bent ruler. You don't want to use a broken tool to measure accurately. And that's what fiat is. It's a broken tool. Fiat is intrinsically worthless. It can be printed for free by your government or the central banks that they empower to print. And so using that tool to measure the intrinsic value of a physical store of wealth like silver is actually a bad idea. And so we should not measure our silver stack wealth in fiat terms. That's the first point. And the second point is that it's a good example. It's a way that you accurately can measure your wealth. The first way that I like to measure my wealth is using the gold to silver ratio. So I look at my silver stack and I ask, how much gold can I buy with that? And currently, the gold to silver ratio is very favorable to gold stackers. If you have gold today, you can trade an ounce of gold for about 82 ounces of silver. And I think if you have gold, you should do that, because I think historically we've seen that the gold to silver ratio is like a pendulum. It'll swing in favor of gold at one moment and in silver towards silver another. And normatively, we see the ratio in the neighborhood of 40 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold. That's kind of normal. But silver comes out of the ground at like 8-1. And so there's an argument to be made that silver should be closer to 8-1 in terms of gold to silver. And so, 8 ounces of silver could buy you 1 ounce of gold if you use the ratio at which they come out of the ground. And historically, we've seen silver to gold be something like 10 or 12 ounces of silver for 1 ounce of gold. That's happened 2 or 3 times in the history of the modern world, anyways. And in the last 100 years, that's happened 2 or 3 times. And I think it's going to happen again. I think we're going to see silver to gold in the neighborhood of 15-1. But as silver to gold moves even like 40-1, I'll be selling some of my silver into gold, because I like gold just as much as I like silver. It's just today I'm buying silver because it's undervalued as compared to gold. And so again, you measure your wealth of the silver stack in terms of how much gold it'll buy you, and you look at the silver to gold ratio as a metric for when it would be good to move from one to the other. And so that's one way to measure your wealth. That's one way to measure the inherent value of your silver stack using gold. The second one that I like to think about is real estate. You can see that in historic times where we've had economic recession or depression, where credit becomes difficult to access and maybe the banks are suffering because recession is at work and interest rates are huge, so people can't borrow easily. You see that silver will buy you more arable land than it does today. Right now, today we have easy money. The banks will lend you anything for anyone. You show them you got a job and they'll give you a car loan, and the car place will send you home with a beautiful new car and $10,000 in your pocket. Housing, in Canada you can get a 2 or 3% mortgage on a 5-year fixed term, and it'll be a 30-year term, and you could borrow $500,000 with a medium with very low income. And so credit is easy. Credit is cheap. Money is easy to access today because fiat is easily printed by governments and banks today. But in a future where hyperinflation causes that fiat to fail, the establishment that is printing that money today will not exist. And you'll see failure of banks, you'll see governments declaring bankruptcy, whether it's your state or province, or whether it's literally, revolutions unfolding. Maybe that won't happen in America, but that has happened in other places. And so you're going to see new currencies, but there's going to be a transition period where there's going to be no easy money. So the only people that are desperate to sell will be selling into the people who have physical wealth, like silver, and us silver stackers will have a huge advantage in that environment, because there will be a glut of sellers and only a few of us that will have the capability to buy, because you have silver and that is physical wealth. So, despite there being no credit, you can buy that home. And so there'll be a moment in time again, and there has been historically, and there will be again, where your silver will trade favorably for real estate. And that's another way to measure your wealth. How much wealth does your silver buy you? How much real estate does it buy you? And so that's example number 2. Just to reiterate, you can measure it by fiat, but you shouldn't, because fiat is a broken measurement tool. You can measure it by gold. That's a great way to measure the wealth of your silver stack. You can measure it by how much arable land or real estate it'll buy you, and that's another great way. And the third good way is by measuring it in terms of human labor. And there's an interesting argument to be made for 1/10 of an ounce of silver as the equivalent to a fair pay, an appropriate pay for 1 day's hard labor. And that might blow some people away, because an ounce of silver in Canadian terms is about $25. So that means 1/10 of an ounce is about $2.50. So how is it reasonable to say that's worth a day of hard labor? Because in Canada, the minimum wage is like $10 an hour. So how is $2 an hour or $2 a day fair or reasonable? And to answer that question, you have to understand what monetary inflation is and what price inflation is, because like I said earlier, the fiat, the measurement tool, the metric by which you can measure with fiat is intrinsically broken, because fiat is intrinsically worthless. And so today in Canada, you might get paid $40 an hour, but that doesn't mean your labor is worth it. The question is, what is the fiat they're giving you worth? It's worth almost nothing. And so, yeah, they have to throw a lot of it at you to pay for your labor. But if the value of the thing they were paying you in was meaningful, then they would give you less of it. And so how do I know this, or what's the proof of this claim? Well, look at historic examples. Like in the Bible, you could see that Roman soldiers who risked their lives to protect Rome, they literally risked their lives every day. They'd get paid a denarius for that work. That's 1/10 of an ounce of silver. Or people would go work fields for farmers, for land to collect the crops or to sow the field on behalf of some rich man, and the rich man would pay them a denarius, which is again 1/10 of an ounce of silver. So you'd work out in the beating sun, under the hot sun, and hard work for 1/10 of an ounce of silver, $2.50 a day. Well, that was thousands of years ago, but not today. No, even today. Half of the world, 3.5 billion people, live on less than $2.50 a day. That means that half of the world, 1 out of every 2 human beings lives on less than $2.50 a day. Which means that hard human labor is worth around $2.50 a day. Because, and they're not the anomaly. The 50% of the world getting paid that means that that's not the anomaly. That's the norm. We in America and Canada and Europe, who get paid hundreds of dollars a day, are the anomaly. And again, it's the anomaly comes out of the brokenness of fiat. We see through monetary inflation, which is the act of the governments and banks creating money out of nothing. We see price inflation, which is the increase. Price inflation is when you have an increased monetary pool, so there's more money chasing after the same goods and services. Prices inflate in that environment. So you see stocks go up and bonds go up in real estate, and labor hours go up. In wages, they'll go up because the money they're paying you in is worthless, and they need to throw more of it at you to pay for the intrinsic value of your labor. And so we are the anomaly. Because of monetary inflation, we have price inflation in the Western world, and that results in people receiving vast sums of money for work that elsewhere would be paid and historically would be paid for around 1/10 of an ounce of silver a day. And 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 there's more examples. You can look at 80% of the population, that's 8 out of 10 people in the world, live off of $10 or less a day. So even the richest people, this is like most of the richest people in the world, these should be considered the rich people. They're getting paid 4/10 of an ounce of silver. That's like half an ounce of silver a day for their work. And so if we think about silver as being worth so much gold, that's one way to measure it. Or so much real estate, that's another way to measure it. Or even so much labor, you get this picture of what the value and the wealth stored in your stack really is. Because that fiat measurement is a broken tool, and it's not an effective way to measure the wealth built in that stack. So don't measure your wealth in fiat. Measure it in ounces. Measure your silver stack's wealth in how much gold it'll buy you, or real estate, or labor. And when you understand that, you begin to recognize that when you're stacking 1 or 10 or 100 ounces of silver, you're actually stacking a significant amount of wealth away. And it might only cost $16 an ounce today, but that doesn't mean that $16 is a fair or reasonable payment for that. That's one circle troy ounce round. It's not a fair payment. That fiat is worthless intrinsically, and your silver is worth a lot intrinsically. It has industrial use and commercial use, and it has monetary use historically, and I think even again it will tomorrow when maybe not tomorrow, but in the future, where this fiat Ponzi scheme kind of unfolds as it must. If governments wanted to change their ways and stop deficit spending, perhaps they could turn things around, and maybe the US dollar would not hyperinflate. But they don't want to change their ways. They're intent on deficit spending until we stop them. And we don't want to stop them. Most people don't even understand the principles about what I'm discussing today. They don't know what monetary inflation is or hyperinflation. They don't know what quantitative easing is or fractional reserve lending. If any of those topics are confusing to you guys, I implore you to check them out online. You can Google them and learn more about that today. I think it's an important topic, and I think measuring our wealth is an important topic, which I wanted to discuss today, and I hope I have, and I hope I've offered some clarity and insight to you. And but that's all for today. Thank you so much for your time and attention. If you're interested, I post content like this daily on YouTube or Steem it, and I'll talk about my finances or my family or my faith. And steemit.com is a website where you can get paid cryptocurrency for blogging or commenting or even for upvoting my content. And it's free to join, so check it out. The link will be in the description. Thanks, guys. Have an awesome day. God bless.